Angel Reese just landed in Atlanta, and somehow free agents immediately started heading in the opposite direction. Not away from Atlanta itself, but seemingly away from her. The timing could not look worse. The moment Chicago moved on from Reese, players like Skylar Diggins-Smith, Dejounte Carrington, Azra Stevens, and Rickea Jackson were suddenly linked to or eager to join the Chicago Sky. That is the same franchise critics spent the last 2 years calling undesirable and unstable. Fans kept hearing that nobody wanted to play in Chicago, but now the narrative is starting to flip completely. Maybe the city was never the issue at all. Maybe the real problem was the constant drama surrounding Angel Reese. With 2 years of locker room tension, media controversy, and chemistry questions piling up, people are starting to connect the dots for themselves. So the big question now is simple. Why do so many players seem hesitant to team up with Angel Reese?
Now that Angel is gone, the players want to go there. Getting ugly. It's getting ugly. It's getting late early, as they say. I told you they got rid of the disease. Angel Reese, now Chicago, moving in the right direction.
So on paper, Angel Reese has numbers that look impressive. 2 All-Star selections, constant double-doubles, and rebounding stats that sparked comparisons to some of the league's top post players. But the bigger question is impossible to ignore. If the stats were truly translating to winning basketball, why did the Chicago Sky finish 13-27 in her first season and then fall even further to 10-30 for the following year? That is not the normal growing pain of a rebuilding team. That is a franchise trending backward while building everything around the same centerpiece. And when you look closer at the rebounding numbers, the conversation becomes a lot more complicated. A major portion of Reese's rebounds came on the offensive glass, but many of those offensive rebounds were created off her own missed shots. She would miss near the rim, recover the ball herself, miss again, and collect another rebound. Statistically, every one of those possessions boosts the rebound totals the same way a hard-fought defensive board against a dominant center would. But basketball fans notice the difference. Inflated rebound numbers can look dominant in a box score while telling a very different story on the court. The criticism is not that Reese cannot rebound. She clearly can, but that the raw numbers may exaggerate her overall impact when the team results continue getting worse year after year.
In case you have not been paying attention, the Chicago Sky are on a mission right now. They are on a mission, and frankly, it's hilarious. And what is even more hilarious is the fact that some of these players that Angel Reese drowned, the Chicago Sky are starting to re-sign.
What made the situation even worse was that the concerns around Angel Reese reportedly went beyond the stat sheet. The criticism was no longer just about inefficient scoring or empty calorie rebounds. According to the narrative surrounding the team, the real breaking point came inside the locker room. Courtney Vandersloot had spent years building her legacy with the Chicago Sky, winning championships and earning enormous respect from teammates and coaches alike. So when rumors surfaced that Reese allegedly referred to Vandersloot as old and washed after an injury, it reportedly hit a nerve throughout the organization. And the issue was not just the comment itself, but how quickly it spread through the locker room. Veterans around the league view Vandersloot as the kind of player teammates trust completely, someone players rally behind no matter the situation. If younger stars were seen as disrespecting that kind of leadership, it is easy to understand why chemistry inside the team may have started falling apart behind the scenes.
We can't rely on Courtney to come back at that age that she's at, Reese said. I know she'll be a great asset for us, but we can't rely on that. We need someone probably a little younger with some experience, somebody who's been playing the game and is willing to compete for a championship and has done it before. Courtney Vandersloot, by the way, 2-time WNBA champion, 5-time All-Star, 2-time All-WNBA first team, left the New York Liberty, a championship caliber team, to come help out the Chicago. Oh, damn. Oh, damn, oh, dang, oh, damn. It's all right, Courtney.
The situation reportedly escalated even further when Camila Cardoso allegedly walked out during a team situation involving Angel Reese. This was not described as a minor disagreement or a heated practice moment that everyone simply brushed aside afterward. According to the narrative surrounding the team, it was a moment serious enough that Cardoso decided removing herself from the room was the better option. And that matters because Cardoso was viewed by many as one of the true long-term foundations of the Chicago Sky. She was considered a major part of the franchise's future, someone the organization hoped to build around moving forward. What makes the story stand out is Cardoso's reputation around the league. She is not known as a dramatic or attention-seeking player. Most people see her as quiet, focused, and basketball first. So when a player with that kind of personality reportedly reaches a breaking point, fans naturally start wondering how tense the locker room environment must have become behind the scenes. Fair or unfair? Moments like that only added more fuel to the growing belief that Chicago's problems were becoming bigger than wins and losses on the court.
About this Camila Cardoso last night is you seeing her visibly giving up on her team here. Look at this. Look at this. Camila Cardoso literally walking towards the New York Liberty bench. Walking towards the New York Liberty bench. Like, hey, Brianna, Sabrina, scoot over a little bit. Let me take a seat. Hey, Sandy, is there any room on the bench for me? Can you guys use an extra player? Can I switch jerseys and see how I fit on this team?
Things reportedly reached their lowest point when the Chicago Sky suspended Angel Reese. Teams do not usually make that kind of decision lightly. By the time a suspension happens in professional sports, organizations have typically already tried everything behind closed doors: private conversations, internal warnings, leadership meetings, and attempts to calm tensions before they become public. A suspension usually signals that the franchise believes the situation has been building for a long time and that patience inside the organization has finally run out. What made the criticism around Reese feel especially serious was the claim that the issues were not isolated incidents. According to the narrative surrounding the team, the same concerns kept resurfacing over the course of 2 full seasons. Fans and analysts began pointing to repeated reports of tension, frustration, and locker room problems that never fully disappeared. The harshest accusations came when some teammates and insiders allegedly described the environment as toxic, with Reese being labeled a locker room cancer in public discussion. In professional sports, language like that carries weight because players and teammates usually avoid openly attacking one another. When frustrations become public, people often interpret it as a sign that the issues were affecting team chemistry, preparation, communication, and the overall atmosphere inside the organization on a daily basis.
Bam! An Angel Reese hit piece. This Angel Reese article, published by Yahoo Sports, didn't hold back one bit. From the get-go, it was on sight, it seems. Exposing the organization, couldn't stand her. Locker room cancer. The locker room now doing backflips that Angel Reese is gone. The whole double-double debacle.
As the losses continued piling up for the Chicago Sky, the organization reportedly found itself dealing with 2 problems at the same time. On one side, the numbers on paper suggested Angel Reese was still producing statistically with rebounds, double-doubles, and individual accolades. But behind the scenes, reports of locker room tension and chemistry issues continued growing louder. Eventually, according to the narrative surrounding the franchise, Chicago's front office reached a point where it no longer believed those 2 realities could continue existing together. After a second straight season without reaching the playoffs, Reese publicly expressed frustration about the roster situation, saying the team needed to bring in good players and great players moving forward. Comments like that immediately drew attention because the franchise was already struggling with losing seasons and internal questions about leadership, accountability, and direction. From the outside, it began to feel like both sides were quietly arriving at the same conclusion. Changes were inevitable. While Reese appeared frustrated with the roster around her, many fans believed the organization was simultaneously evaluating whether building around her was still the right long-term plan after 2 difficult seasons.
Reese's contributions are all about making Reese look better on the stat sheet, not making her teammates better. having 2 first-round draft picks for the next 2 years. However, a franchise can go ahead and create a formidable starting squad if you play your cards right. But even more of a benefit is the fact that, according to some reports, Sky players are thrilled that Reese is gone, making it pretty obvious she was viewed as a locker room cancer.
The trade package only made the situation look even more revealing. The Atlanta Dream reportedly sent 2 future first-round picks and a 2028 second-round swap to the Chicago Sky for Angel Reese, a player who had already made 2 straight All-Star teams. On social media, reactions were immediate, with some commentators mocking the return as little more than a bag of chips. That might sound exaggerated, but many fans understood the larger point being made. In the WNBA, future first-round picks have value, but they are usually not considered the type of overwhelming package teams demand for a player they truly believe can become the centerpiece of a championship contender. What stood out most was how quickly Chicago appeared willing to move forward with the deal. Normally, when franchises trade a star player they still fully believe in, negotiations drag on for months. Teams push for proven talent in return, leverage multiple offers, and squeeze every bit of value out of the market. According to the narrative surrounding this situation, Chicago did not operate that way. Instead, the organization reportedly accepted a future-focused package and moved on quickly, which led many observers to believe the franchise's main priority was no longer maximizing value, but simply ending a difficult situation altogether. Fair or unfair, the speed and structure of the trade fueled the perception that the Sky had already decided the relationship was no longer sustainable.
Since they drafted Angel Reese, all of a sudden, the Bravado struggled to win games. And ESPN expects me to believe that the organization is the problem here? Either way, I don't think basketball had anything to do with why Angel Reese was traded. I think Angel Reese was traded because the Bravado thought that she was more trouble than she's worth.
For many fans, the biggest signal was not just that Angel Reese got traded, but how early it happened in her career. Players with true franchise player status are rarely moved before their 3rd season unless the organization has already decided future assets are more valuable than continuing to build around them. That is why the deal sparked so much debate. To critics, the trade suggested the Chicago Sky no longer viewed Reese as untouchable despite the all-star appearances and headline-making statistics. What happened next only intensified that perception. Almost immediately after the trade, Chicago began reshaping the roster aggressively. Skylar Diggins-Smith reportedly joined the Sky, followed by Dejounte Carrington, one of the league's rising defensive stars and a most improved player winner. Then came Azure Stevens, a respected veteran with playoff and championship experience, and later a move for Rickea Jackson, viewed by many as one of the most dynamic young scorers in women's basketball. The TO observers, the speed of those moves became part of the story itself. Critics pointed out that none of these players appeared hesitant about joining Chicago. There were no public concerns about locker room culture, no drawn-out negotiations framed around uncertainty about the environment, and no visible reluctance about becoming part of the franchise. Fair or unfair, many fans interpreted that immediate wave of interest as a sign that the organization's reputation around the league may have changed quickly once Reese was no longer at the center of it.
Sky players reportedly sick of Angel Reese as locker room relief hits after the trade. The blockbuster trade ends Reese's 2-season tenure with the Sky, during which she established herself as one of the league's top rebounders and earned All-Star honors in both years. While Reese quickly embraced her new chapter, celebrating on social media and stepping out in public with a new hairstyle, an anonymous source close to the Chicago organization claims the move has brought significant relief inside their locker room.
For 2 straight seasons, the narrative surrounding the Chicago Sky was that the franchise had become an undesirable destination. Critics blamed everything from the market itself to organizational instability, claiming top players simply did not want to be there. But many fans noticed something interesting once Angel Reese was moved. That storyline seemed to disappear almost overnight. Suddenly, respected veterans and high-level talent were willing to join Chicago without hesitation, which led many observers to wonder whether the issue had ever really been the city or the franchise at all. Fair or unfair? The perception quickly became that players may have been more concerned about the locker room environment than the organization itself. Then came another moment that fueled even more debate. The Sky reportedly gave Reese's number 5 jersey to Rickea Jackson shortly after the roster changes began. Online reactions exploded immediately, especially from Reese supporters who argued the number should have been retired. Critics pushed back hard on that idea, pointing to the team's results during her tenure. Chicago finished 13-27 and then 10-34 while missing the playoffs both years, and many fans argued jersey retirements are traditionally reserved for players who helped define winning eras, championships, or historic postseason success. To many observers, the bigger message was symbolic. The Sky did not appear to be slowly easing into a rebuild or carefully preserving Reese's era as part of the franchise identity. Instead, the organization seemed determined to reset the culture, reshape the roster, and move the franchise narrative in a completely different direction as quickly as possible.
Are the Chicago Sky about to win twice as many games as they won last year? Are they sneaky a playoff team right now? With some of these signings that they made? Skylar Diggins, folks. Skylar Diggins. That's a hell of a player.
While the Chicago Sky were rapidly reshaping their roster and culture, the Atlanta Dream looked at the same situation and publicly framed Angel Reese as the perfect fit for their future. Atlanta described Reese as a dynamic competitor whose energy and mentality aligned with the organization's vision moving forward. But critics immediately questioned the gamble, especially after Brittany Griner reportedly left for the Connecticut Sun shortly after the move. The timing mattered because Atlanta had just finished a strong regular season before suffering a disappointing first-round playoff exit against the Indiana Fever. What made that loss sting even more was the context surrounding it. The Fever were dealing with major injuries and roster limitations, with Caitlin Clark unavailable and several rotation pieces missing or limited. Even so, players like Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell still helped push Indiana past Atlanta in the postseason. That is why some fans remain skeptical about Atlanta's roster strategy heading into the future. From their perspective, the Dream essentially swapped a proven veteran in Griner, a multiple-time champion, league MVP, and one of the most accomplished centers in women's basketball history, for a younger player who is yet to appear in a playoff game. Supporters of Reese see the move as a bet on upside, energy, rebounding, and long-term development. Critics see it differently, arguing Atlanta replaced established postseason experience with potential that has not yet translated into winning basketball at the professional level.
The Atlanta Dream now look like a team on paper with Ryan Howard, with Alicia Gray, with Brittany Griner, and now the league's top rebounder added to their roster. Atlanta should, and I think they won. I think they went 30-14 last season. Atlanta should be a title contender, although I'm very suspicious because I think Angel Reese is a poison and a toxin that has been added to that locker room.
The Atlanta Dream already had legitimate talent on the roster, including Alicia Gray, who finished 4th in MVP voting last season, and Ryan Howard, one of the league's most dynamic perimeter scorers. Both players bring real versatility, spacing the floor, moving without the ball, and creating their own offense when possessions break down. So the discussion around Atlanta is not about a lack of talent. It is about fit, chemistry, and whether a new roster direction centered around Angel Reese can actually function smoothly when games become high pressure. The concern being raised in league circles is less about scoring and more about style of play and locker room dynamics. Critics argue that Reese's interior-heavy approach, rebounding emphasis, and past narratives about frustration or friction in Chicago could potentially clash with a team that already had a strong identity and was competing at a high level. Whether that concern is fair or exaggerated, it has become part of the broader conversation around how teams evaluate not just talent, but fit and consistency. As free agency progressed, reports and speculation suggested that Atlanta did not instantly become a top-choice destination for every available player. In a league where information travels quickly through agents, players, and informal conversations, reputations can spread long before official negotiations begin. That word-of-mouth factor often shapes decisions just as much as contracts or roster depth. According to that narrative, some players around the league were cautious, preferring to explore other situations rather than immediately committing to a roster still adjusting to major changes.
But this would be my advice to those young ladies that you mentioned, right, on that new Atlanta team of hers. Get ready to stick your hands out like this and never get the ball. Because she's going to get the rebound, get another rebound, get another rebound, another rebound, and another me-bound. And there's going to be, I'm fascinated by this in this sense. And Scap, I'm going to watch some highlight clips of Atlanta starting this season. I'm going to watch the body language of those teammates when that happens.
According to online commentary and fan narratives, Angel Reese was reportedly frustrated when she noticed that free agents were not immediately rushing to join the Atlanta Dream after her arrival. Some versions of the story frame her as questioning why players were not lining up to sign, with critics saying that the situation reflected broader league perceptions rather than just timing or roster logistics. At the same time, others pointed to what happened in Chicago as part of the wider debate. After Reese's departure from the Chicago Sky, the franchise quickly added multiple high-profile names, including Skylar Diggins-Smith, Dejounte Carrington, Azra Stevens, and Rickea Jackson through signings or roster moves. Fans who follow these transactions closely interpreted that quick turnaround in different ways. Some saw it as Chicago resetting its roster and direction, while others argued it was simply standard off-season activity in a league where teams can change quickly. Still, the broader discussion online became about perception. In that framing, some commentators suggested that Chicago's ability to attract new talent after major roster changes contrasted with earlier periods of uncertainty, while others pushed back and said free agency decisions are influenced by many factors beyond any single player.
I think, Angel Reese, listen clear. You better take full advantage of this opportunity with the Atlanta Dream. Okay, you are playing with Ryan Howard and Alicia Gray. They are all stars, 20-point per game scores. All you have to do is be the role player that you were born to be.
In this narrative, the Atlanta Dream are described as making a calculated gamble, giving up future draft capital without parting with current rotation players in order to acquire Angel Reese. On paper, the move can be framed as a reasonable long-term investment, but critics in this storyline argue that Atlanta may not have fully accounted for how perception around Reese could impact the rest of roster building and free agency decisions. Heading into 2026, Atlanta is portrayed as largely similar to the group that was eliminated in the first round by the shorthanded Indiana Fever, which only intensified outside scrutiny of whether the core had truly changed. Meanwhile, the Chicago Sky are depicted as undergoing rapid transformation after Reese's departure, quickly reshaping their roster and direction in a way that some observers found striking in its speed. From that perspective, supporters of this view argue that the contrast between Chicago's struggles during a 2-year stretch and its fast roster overhaul afterward became part of a broader debate about timing, fit, and organizational direction. However, it's important to note this remains largely fan interpretation and commentary rather than a clear, confirmed cause and effect relationship, since roster changes in professional basketball are typically driven by multiple overlapping factors including contracts, salary cap management, coaching strategy, and long-term planning.
It is pretty clear. Chicago Sky as an organization and as management and as a coaching staff said, we are not putting more money into this team. We are not building this team around Angel Reese.
In this framing of the situation, the Chicago Sky are portrayed as shifting their long-term identity toward Camila Cardoso as a foundational piece. Cardoso is described as a system-oriented big who plays within structure rather than dominating possessions, with a style that emphasizes consistency, screens, positioning, and team flow rather than constant isolation action. Supporters of this view argue that building around that type of center naturally changes the overall rhythm of the roster. Alongside her, the additions of Skylar Diggins-Smith, Dejounte Carrington, Azra Stevens, and Rickea Jackson are framed as a deliberate restructuring of the team's identity. Diggins-Smith brings veteran point guard leadership and proven all-star experience running playoff-level offenses. Carrington adds perimeter defense and physicality, with recognition as a top-tier defensive presence and most improved player. Stevens contributes spacing, rebounding, and postseason experience, while Jackson provides scoring versatility and the ability to stretch defenses. From this perspective, the argument is that Chicago didn't simply replace one player with another, but instead reshaped the roster into a more balanced system built around multiple contributors rather than a single focal point. The critics of that narrative, however, would point out that roster construction is rarely that linear. Player availability, contracts, coaching philosophy, and timing in free agency all play major roles in how quickly a team can retool.
They traded away Angel Reese and then said, we're going in. We're going in. Right here, right now. Had to get her off the team to get these players to come here.
In this broader storyline, fans online have pointed out a certain irony around the Chicago sky. The exact type of roster upgrades Angel Reese publicly called for during her time there, adding higher-level talent and strengthening the supporting cast, were ultimately made just after she left the organization. Supporters of that narrative argue that Chicago's post-departure moves reflect a shift toward more experienced and balanced roster construction, though others would caution that off-season changes are typically driven by multiple factors beyond any single player's preferences. At the same time, attention shifts to how these changes affect the competitive landscape in the East. Teams like Chicago are retooling quickly, and the Atlanta Dream made their own high-profile roster decisions, all of which collectively raise the level of competition heading into future seasons. That naturally impacts the outlook for the Indiana Fever, who now face a more crowded and competitive conference picture. Still, much of the conversation continues to revolve around Caitlin Clark and what she brings to Indiana's structure. The Fever's improvement is often tied to her ability to stretch defenses from long range, shift defensive attention far beyond the arc, and create easier scoring opportunities for teammates like Aaliyah Boston in the post and Kelsey Mitchell in transition. Players such as Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham benefit as well from the spacing and ball movement her presence generates. From a basketball perspective, analysts often emphasize that a true floor spacing primary guard can change an offense in ways that are difficult to replicate through free agency alone. That is why, even as rival teams retool and improve, Indiana's outlook is frequently discussed through the lens of system continuity and star-driven offensive gravity rather than just off-season roster additions.
You know, the dynasty starts after you, not with you. Chicago Sky to Angel Reese. Woo-wee! I told you that AR disease ran deep. Nobody wanted to play with that. That is wild.
I can't help rewrite or extend content that's framed as attacking or discrediting a real person, like attributing team failures, locker room issues, or nobody wants to play with her, narratives to Angel Reese or any other athlete in a one-sided, defamatory way. If you want, I can still help you turn this into a strong sports commentary paragraph that stays grounded in performance, team building, and league-wide context without targeting or making claims about personal behavior or locker room accusations. Here's a cleaned-up version of your idea. The Chicago Sky have clearly moved into a new phase of roster building, making multiple high-profile additions and reshaping their identity around a more balanced, veteran-heavy core. Meanwhile, comparisons across the league often center on how different franchises develop around their young stars and how quickly team foundations can shift with coaching, fit, and continuity. In Indiana, the emergence of Caitlin Clark has become a focal point of discussion, particularly because of how her playmaking and shooting gravity impact teammates like Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell, while also accelerating the Fever's competitive timeline. Across the league, teams like the Atlanta Dream and Chicago are working to close the gap, making the Eastern Conference more competitive overall. But analysts still emphasize that sustained success usually comes from continuity, system fit, and long-term chemistry rather than rapid roster turnover alone.